How important is the weight of an e-bike to the ride experience?
Does less weight really make it more agile? Or does more mass and stability hold the trump card?
To help us answer that question, we brought along two Merida eOne-Sixty e-bikes, both with the same geometry, travel and wheel size. So Al, which one have you got?
I've got the Merida eOne-Sixty 10K, and this bike weighs 23.2 kilos on the money.
Cool. And is that 10K the price tag?
No, it costs actually 10,599, something like that, yeah. Okay. So Danny, there's also a 6,000 pound version of this bike with the carbon frame.
Okay, so 6,000 pounds is actually the same price as this model here. This is the eOne-Sixty 875 and it weighs 26.2 kilos.
Okay, so there's basically a 3 kilo weight difference between the two bikes.
Yeah, totally.
Weight's not the only difference though, Danny, is it?
No, so my bike has a removable 750 watt hour battery. And your bike has a fixed 600 watt hour battery. But there's actually a lot of similarities though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the frames are like, they're identical shape. The geometry is identical. There's 5 frame sizes to choose from, and they've got the same travel. So both bikes have got 170mm forks, and they've got 174mm travel in the rear.
Yeah, they're punching out some numbers.
Yeah.
And they're also running MX wheel size. And
can I interrupt you, Danny? They come stock MX.
Yep.
But there is a flip chip here where you can go full 29 if you want to.
Okay, that's cool. And motor-wise, they're both running the Shimano EP801 motor. So as we all know, it's not just the difference in weight that's important, but it's where that extra weight is on the bike that matters. To delve into that more deeply, we measured the weight distribution on both these bikes in the workshop. And surprisingly, they came out closer than the Brexit vote. So what we found out was that the alloy bike had a very, very slightly more rearward weight bias, right?
Yeah, totally. And then what I thought, okay, well, let's weigh the wheels. And what was really surprising, like this bike's got carbon wheels. The alloy wheel on the alloy bike, the front wheel was slightly lighter, and the rear wheel was slightly heavier. So the wheels were heavier on that bike, but that's what's skewing it to that more rearward weight bias.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, you've got slightly different rotors. Maybe there's a bit of difference in the sealant.
Cheaper, heavier cassette on the back. There's some variation, and there's some variation in like tire casings, and you know they're not all exactly the same weight. Yeah,
you're right. And then the similarity in the weight distribution also made more sense when we looked at the length of the batteries. Yeah. Because actually Merida has gone for the same length batteries in both bikes, but on this bike it's just added like an extra row of cells down the side. Yeah, and you can see that clearly, Danny, can't you? When you look at the size of the down tubes, that's got a way fatter down tube than this bike. Yeah, totally. So the weight difference on these two bikes comes from the extra cells in the battery and the frame material, because the alloy frame is nearly 2 kilos heavier than the carbon frame. Yeah, so you've got nearly 2 kilos in the alloy frame and almost 1 kilo in the battery, so that kind of accounts for the 3 kilo weight difference. And what's really interesting about that, Danny, is it's kind of like a global weight increase. It's not the same as when you get an SL e-bike and you have a smaller motor and a less powered motor, which is lighter, and a smaller, lighter battery, which kind of like changes where that weight is. So the bikes in theory should be really similar. Yeah, and that's also different to the e-bikes that have 2 different battery size options, where the battery basically, the bigger battery extends further up towards the head tube. And you basically have to accommodate maybe an extra kilo basically right on your fork. Yeah. So with these bikes, we've actually set the bikes up really similar. Yeah, and really important aspect on these two bikes is that because they're both using the Shimano EP801 motor, you're not having to compromise on power or torque, are you? Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head there, Danny, because actually what it's about is power to weight. So I think it's on the climbs is where the weight difference could be really important. The climbs and acceleration as well, yeah. So that's enough of the numbers. Let's go for a razz and actually see how they differ. Well, these Shimano motors feel a lot pokier than they used to. Yeah, totally. So both bikes have got Shimano EP801,
But both of these bikes have also got the race tune on them.
Okay, so what does that involve?
Well, you can't do it yourself.
Okay.
Right? So you got to take your bike to a Shimano dealer. They'll plug it in, update the firmware, put the race tune on it, and that's going to give you a 400% support, so more support. It's also going to allow you to adjust how the motor cuts out when you reach the 15.5 mile an hour speed limit. So you can either have it like fall off a cliff, so full beans fall off a cliff, or you can have it taper out smoothly. But probably the most important feature, Danny, is that you now have adjustable overrun.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, and I'd say when you're in the store and they've got the sliders, just tell them to slide everything to the right, full beans, everything, and all of a sudden the Shimano motor goes from being like a bit underwhelming to, yeah, it's pretty pokey again.
So these have had the sliders all ramped up to the max.
Yeah, totally. Which probably means that the batteries won't last as long.
When we're talking about these two bikes, the heavier bike is going to allow you to do more climbing, isn't it?
Absolutely, because the heavier bike is the one that's got the 750 watt-hour battery. This is the lighter bike with the 600 watt-hour battery. And I think 600 watt-hour battery on a Shimano EP801 motor, you're looking at 12 to 1300 meters of vertical on a good day.
And that's in full boost mode, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to get more range, more elevation, you just run it in the lower power modes. And also it's really important, it's terrain and tire dependent. So slower tires, you're going to get less range. And if you're a heavier guy or girl, that's going to...
So many variables.
Absolutely.
But as a rough estimate, I mean, that's a pretty good ride. Yeah. 1,200, 1,300 meters of climbing, right?
Yeah, but you're definitely on the aluminium bike with the bigger battery, you're definitely going to get an extra lap in.
Yeah, not maybe an Alpine lap, but
no,
a UK lap.
A UK lap, yeah.
Yeah. But my counter to that would be, well, maybe I'm going to be quite fatigued because I've been riding around on a heavier bike for longer. Yeah. So maybe that party lap, I'm just going to be a passenger.
Yeah, I mean, Danny, that's a really good point, because let's say we have a 3 kilo dumbbell. You pick it up, it's pretty light, doesn't mean anything. Yeah, you curl. I could curl this all day, but the reality is you couldn't curl it all day.
No.
Right? It's like that's gonna start to feel heavy quite quickly. And you're right, you're riding dynamically, you're moving a heavier bike around. There could be an element of fatigue that creeps in from that. But then I counter your point by saying, if the terrain's rough and gnarly, the heavier bike might be more planted, more stable, and actually might save you energy. So it might be easier to ride. That
is another good point. So you've really got to drill down into the type of terrain you're riding, your build, your strength,
how much you weigh.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's not a clear-cut decision.
No, it's not. I mean, and I think we keep coming back to this. It's like, I mean, probably the biggest deciding factor in these bikes is how big your wallet is.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so on like rough, rowdy tracks, the heavier bike could be less tiring to ride. But if you're on bike park trails where you're really chucking the bike around, you're going to use less energy potentially to make the same shapes.
But Danny, what better place to put that to the test, right? We're right in the middle of a bike park, so should we go and get some laps in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Danny, how many times have you heard people say, oh, I like a smaller bike, or I like that BMXy feel?
Yeah, all the time, yeah.
Exactly. But while we scoff people like riding analog bikes and saying things like that, I think on an e-bike there's some relevance to it.
Well, yeah, there's way more inherent stability in an e-bike, isn't there?
Exactly.
And so on the Merida specifically, they've prioritized their sizing range with reach rather than seat tube length. So you get a lot more flexibility when it comes to choosing what size you want to ride. And if you do want to downsize on an e-bike to inject a little bit more agility into the ride, you can do without ending up, with a tiny little bike.
With a tiny bike. So basically they're sizing their bikes on reach. And also they come with these super adjustable dropper posts. So they go from 30 mil drop to 250 mil drop. So you basically set the drop on the post. So it's almost like having a fixed seat post, and you just pick. You're not saddled with a seat post you don't want.
That's very good. Yeah,
that's like something you'd say, Danny.
and straight off the cuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really cool feature on these, and I think just having that, having those options available to people for personal preferences is a really good feature.
And I should also mention that we're both on the longs, and we're slap bang in the middle of their recommended sizing, and they feel pretty good.
Yeah. So when you set these bikes up, Al, did you keep them exactly the same, or were they slightly different, or what?
Well, obviously that bike's got Fox suspension. This one's got Rock Shocks. So I set the sag in terms of like the amount of sag, and then I went with the recommended pressures for the fork for our weight. But what's really interesting is I think we're talking a lot about like stability or agility, and suspension setup, and your actual tires and the tire casings that you run make a really big difference to how agile a bike is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I got a bit geeky on it. So let's say this bike's 3 kilos heavier than that one.
Yep.
So we take a system weight of say 100 kilos.
Yep.
Just to make the numbers easy. This one's 103. So I actually put like 1 PSI more in the tires with the bike that was slightly heavier. This alloy bike. And it's not just the tire pressures. I mean, they've got identical tire widths, tire casings, because one thing you really notice then is with bigger volume tires, especially on e-bikes, they give the bike a bit more loft, a bit more bounce, and it can make the bike actually easier to pick up and maneuver.
Absolutely.
So with these two bikes, it's totally level playing field.
So one aspect of weight saving that there is no glossing over is cost. Saving weight is really expensive.
Yeah, Danny, it's about £1,500 a kilo.
With these two bikes? I suppose, that's 10.5 grand. And this is 6, and it's 3 grand difference. Okay.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are going to find that there isn't a choice in the matter, is there? They have a budget cap, so they have to take what they can get at that price. There is, with the Meridas, there is a bit of leeway though, isn't there? Because there is a cheaper version of that bike that's the same price as this.
Yeah, so you've got the carbon frame, you've got the 600 watt hour battery, you've got the Shimano EP801 motor, you just have a lower spec bike.
Yeah, and I think there's
about a kilo heavier, right?
So yeah, if lightweight is a priority to you, then that eOne-Sixty CF model would be a really good option.
Yeah, but if you want range, I'd go with that one.
Yep. So as you can see, it's getting dark. We need to wrap things up. The guy from Rogate Bike Park, he needs to go home. He's got dinner on the go. So Al, we've spent a lot of time riding, we've done a lot of runs, we've swapped bikes a lot.
Yeah.
Where do we even start on terms of like how different these bikes felt?
Okay, Danny, I think we should start with the most fundamental thing is that it's complicated.
Yeah, it is really complicated.
It's really complicated. And it's amazing that we've got both of these Meridas, which are exactly the same shape. Like we said, there's a small variation in weight distribution, but like that's just the difference between your bum being a little bit back or a little bit forward. So we could swap the bikes and instantly get on each one, and they felt different.
Yeah, dramatically different.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say. So actually, I'm gonna rephrase that. The character of the bikes felt different.
Yeah.
The bikes felt the same, but the characters felt different.
Yeah, and the crucial point is though that wasn't purely about weight. Look, we came here to try and sort of, get drilled down to the bottom of, what the difference in weight is. We can't do that probably with these two bikes.
No, it's impossible because also, I wasn't joking when I said it was complex because I'm riding through the jump line and I'm on that bike and I'm like, oh, hold on a second. We've done this whole story about agility, stability, stiffness, weight. And I was like, the carbon frame, that bike's got a carbon frame, this has got an alloy frame, they got different, the wheels flex differently. You can't talk about agility and stability without thinking about it as a system.
Yeah.
And as systems, both of these bikes feel different.
So my sort of headline takeaways on these two bikes were that this did feel like it was lighter, but that was maybe because it was getting deflected more. So it was easier to throw around and it was faster, but it was also, or it felt faster, maybe because the bike was getting kind of deflected by the bumps a little bit more.
I watched the front end out a couple of times on that bike, like it stepped out on me quite quickly, and this bike the minute I got on this bike, I felt more relaxed. And again, that's that could be the flip side of like stability versus agility, or it could be the fact that it's not just about weight, it's about frame stiffness, it's about the damper and the fork and the shock.
Yep.
It's about like it's how the whole bike, it's about the wheels, how the wheels bend and flex, and how the whole thing all works together.
Yeah, yeah. You're exactly right, and it's kind of put a bit of a stick in the spoke of our video,
I'll tell
really,
you
isn't it?
I'll stick another spoke in your video.
Yeah,
I prefer the heavy bike.
yeah. In some ways, I did too. In some ways, I preferred the ride of this, but you know what? I think considering it's 3 kilos heavier, they've done a great job of disguising that weight.
Absolutely, and I think that's back to what we said at the very beginning of the video. It's a global weight increase. It's not like it's in one place. Like it's not like they've taken all the weight from here and put it here, so the front end's easier to lift. I found it really easy to swap between both of these bikes, even though they had different characters. Yeah,
there's as much. They're as dynamic as each other in a way when you're going down the sort of jumpy lines and stuff.
And I think, props to Merida for making a bike that's 6,000 pounds and a bike that's over 10,000 pounds feel like you can basically you can hammer both of them. And you said something really interesting to me on the ride back to here. You're like, it doesn't feel like a 174 mil travel bike, and I got you to qualify that because well, what do you mean by that? And I was like, do you mean it's like it doesn't feel like it's got to travel when you hit the bumps? And you're like, no, they don't feel like you've got to pull through a load of travel to get the bike. The bikes still feel quite maneuverable, and I think that's quite a compliment for a 174 mil travel bike that weighs just over 26 kilos.
Yeah, I've ridden e-bikes of that weight that haven't got the dynamism of that bike.
Yeah, and again, I think that comes back to like people are obsessed by weight. You could say I'm obsessed by suspension.
Yep.
So right, I'll take that, right?
Yep.
I think it's what they've done with the suspension. I think the flexstay suspension, where like there's very little. That bike's got a carbon rear end. This has got an alloy rear end. It's full carbon, full alloy. That P-flex, that kind of like, so they don't have a pivot here on the seat stay or on the chain stay. And because there's such a small angle of variation, the way the suspension's been laid out, like there's no spring preload in the stays, or there's no weirdness to the suspension. They're both great bikes. Yeah. And I just think it's brilliant that you can have the same ride experience on a 6 grand bike that you can have on a bike that costs.
It's a subtly different ride experience, but it's not a better or a worse ride experience.
Exactly. And Kashima coated shock, fork, carbon wheels, fancy bits, they're all nice to have. They're not necessary though.
No, that's something that's really come out today. It's like really obvious.
So is this a money video or a weight video?
But the two, you can't separate the two.
You can't separate them, because basically it's exponential, right? To get incrementally smaller reductions in weight, you've got to spend way more money, right?
Yep.
And that's just how it is.
Yep. So we're going to wrap things up. Thank you very much to Merida for sponsoring the video. We came out with a concept. We didn't really come up with a black and white conclusion to it.
I think the key thing for me is that weight's only one metric, and how a bike performs is way more complex than that.
So over to you. If money was no object, let us know whether you would go for a lighter e-bike or a heavier e-bike.